let's try this. Can you hear me now? Okay. Apparently my one scene did not have my microphone set up on it. So already with the technical problems on this stream. So apologize for that. Hopefully you are able to hear me now. So, yeah, welcome. I saw your note about the Midnight Syndicate's D&D album. I think I've heard of that before, but I've not actually looked it up. So I'm going to have to give a look into that and see. I will assume that the tracks are not royalty free, so probably using them on YouTube would not be advisable. But definitely have to check it out. See for the purposes of a game that sounds like it might be good. So cool. All right. So yeah, this is picking up where I had left off with my video the other day. The intention here is like I wanted to look at kind of almost start at the beginning. Keep on the Shadowfell was the first rules product, we'll say. I when I've said before, when I've made comments where I've said it's the first 4th edition product, I get a lot of people that are in the comments, hey, no, it wasn't the first. There was the Wizards Presents book. I get that, but it's the first one that had rules in it, and at least officially, I would imagine at the time, and again, not being around for when it was released, I have to feel like there was probably some rules that were leaked somewhere in there, as there may have been some content that they kind of gave some previews in other forms that before this was actually published. Maybe not. I don't know for sure. So, but certainly this was the first thing that they published was Keep on the Shadowfell. And so it was May. It was about a month before they released the core rule books. And so I was just going to take a look at it. And, I imagine that, I know myself, and I'm sure those that are watching probably have, are quite familiar with it. But I kind of want to go through it and think about it from the standpoint of somebody who is new to the game, has not seen 4th edition, and kind of talk through some of the stuff. So, if you're watching this and you haven't played 4th edition, or if you are watching on a replay and you're interested in the rules and what they're about, hopefully, as we go through this, the intention of Keep on the Shadowfell was to really introduce people to 4th edition. So hopefully that makes this a something that would help people who are curious about it learn about it. So I kind of want to go through it, and we'll see. And if anyone's got things they want to share in the chat, if folks that have played Keep on the Shadowfell, or have some thoughts on it, then let's talk about those things. I'd be interested to see. Obviously, with it being the first product, there were some things that changed. They had some tweaks to the rules that they made. So some of the things that are in this are not exactly the way they were later on. They're probably close to what they had in the player's handbook. Certainly by the time you got to the essentials line, some of this stuff had changed, but this is what it was when it first came out. This is the first glimpse people got on it. So I have a PDF that we'll look at. I have my tabletop camera, which is not the best quality, just to kind of show the actual physical book, but I'll bring up the PDF so it's easier for us to see the actual content. But I did want to just kind of flip through what was in it. I'm sure you can't see the back of it, but it was in the US it was $29.95 is what it cost, $34 in Canada. So whether that's a lot in 2008 or not, I don't really know. But it's a decent size adventure for what you get. I mean, you got the quick start rules that we'll look at in more detail. This is 16 pages. Now, about half of that, I believe, is pre-gen characters. So yeah, starting at page 7, it's pre-gen. So you really got about 6 pages of the quick start rules, and then it's the pre-gen characters, which we'll look at in the PDF form in a second. And then the other booklet is the actual adventure, Keep on the Shadowfell, and this one is 80 pages in length. So, and it goes all the way to the end, kind of like Lost Mine of Phandelver for 5th edition in their starter set. It was a what is it, Saddle Stitch or something, whatever that is, where it's just the staples. And there's no like back cover. It has the text all the way right up to the back, and you've got all the encounters in here. And again, we'll look at those in a little more detail. The whole adventure from start to finish is in here. So that's 80 pages on that side. And then on the other side, in the other pocket, is all your fold out maps. And I think there's three, a total of six different maps then, because it's front and back. I'm not going to try to unfold these on this little camera here, but I have digital copies of these, so I haven't actually opened these. They're in pretty good condition, but it's got some of the main locations. What it doesn't have is the actual dungeon crawl for the keep itself. So if you go into the second part of the adventure, you see it's a dungeon crawl with those sorts of rooms and stuff. It doesn't have those maps in here. Those you're kind of expected to draw on your own, but all of the other locations that some of the encounters, including like the final boss battle location, you have an actual map for that in here. So this was pretty much the format that you see for a lot of 4th edition stuff. It's a folder with the pockets, and then you get the adventure module and the maps split up in there. So that's the format of it. And again, it was $29.95 in 2008 when it was released. But if you want the PDF of this, Drive Through RPG, it's free. Download it anytime you want, including all the digital maps that it has. So pretty good deal for that. You can also find them on Noble Knight Games has them. I checked yesterday, and the like near mint condition copy of it for a physical one is, I think it's $30. So basically exactly the same as what you would have paid in 2008 for it. So that's a pretty good deal for a near mint condition copy of it. That's where I got this one probably. I probably bought this about a year ago. But yeah, not a bad deal. So with that, that's kind of look at the physical book. But I want to start kind of go through the books themselves, and I'll flip over to the PDFs so that we can get a better view of them. Hopefully that is big enough. I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of winging it a little bit with the live stream. I because I'm kind of jumping into this head first. I didn't take a lot of time to adjust my overlay size and get too fancy with it. So what I would have made this a little bit bigger. Hopefully it fits okay on the screen, and we can read it as we start getting into things. But let's take a look. And as we're going through it, if you're out there and you are new to 4th edition, I don't know if we've got anybody that's on this live stream that is new and trying to learn the game. But if you are and you got questions on it, let's talk through it and we can see what we can address if there's questions. If you're watching this later on a replay, you got questions, put them in the chat. The community is quite large, and I'm sure that if I don't, then someone else would be able to answer those questions. So, but let's take a look. So as we saw, there's the rules booklet is the what did I say, like 16 pages, and it really jumps right into what 4th edition is. And how you play. So the assumption that it makes is that you haven't played Dungeons and Dragons before, and it's going through the basics. And a lot of this stuff, now I didn't come from 3rd edition, so I when I was first learning, I was only learning 4th edition, but knowing my familiarity with 3rd edition, I look at a lot of this and I think there's a lot of similarities. So I don't think this was a big jump in the basic flow of the game and how you play D&D. The stuff that you do in 4th edition is definitely similar to how you would do it in 3rd edition, especially with, looking at the core mechanic where, the dungeon master decides what the difficulty is going to be, or you're making an attack or something where there's something you need to do. Basically, anytime you need to determine the outcome of something, you're going to roll a d20, and you will then add modifiers, or there will be penalties or whatever to come up with an amount. And whatever that result is, you compare that against what your target was. And if you get at least as good as the target value, then you succeed. If you don't at least hit the target value, then you fail, and there may be consequences from that or not. That is essentially the core mechanic of 4th edition. It's the core mechanic of 3rd edition and 5th edition and many other games in the whole D20 system. So rolling a D20, add in some modifiers or subtract some penalties, compare it against a result, and there you go. Whether it's an attack or a skill check or whatever it is, it's pretty much going to be that D20. And I know that takes a little getting used to for folks that are new to any role-playing game, is because the question is always, what do I roll? What do I roll? And it's pretty much, the answer is always going to be a D20 in most cases where you're trying to determine something. Skill checks, kind of touched on that a little bit. Same deal. You got to determine an outcome. D20, add modifiers, and compare it against a result. Attack rolls. Obviously, when we get into things like powers and position, and you can have different bonuses that would apply. One of the questions that came up in some of the comments from the last video was some concerns about the amount of the math that you have to do and the complexity of keeping track of all those different things, which I get could be a challenge as you get into the game, and you've got, like, if you're doing flanking and but then somebody is marked, and you got to kind of keep track of all those things. So that's something we can dig into, if not in this video, and at another time. So, but so you got, that's your core mechanic. D20, add modifiers, subtract penalties, compare it against a result. Not any different from other editions of the game, and so it's something that should be really, really familiar to folks. Playing 5th edition, even when you have things like advantage, you're still rolling d20s, so no different here with 4th edition. The game then talk about encounters and kind of the structure of the game. So far we're pretty much standard with what people would have been familiar with in 3rd edition and would have been familiar with in all the prior editions of the game. Combat encounters, non-combat encounters, they're both part of the game. Goes into, then we start talking about maybe some stuff where it gets a little bit more specific to 4th edition, where you got your combat sequence. Let me look and see. So actually this is not so much rolling for initiative, surprise rounds. That part's pretty much the same in any edition of the game. So you roll initiative to determine who's going to go first, or the order of who's going to take their turns. If there's a surprise round, if any creatures are caught being surprised by another group of creatures, then they might get to take a free turn before the initiative order actually starts. And then you take your turns. And you basically go through and you loop through all that until the encounter is done. So that's pretty much how the combat sequence works. And again, I think that's similar to what we would have seen in 3rd edition and in other editions of the game. Now, where it starts to definitely deviate is the actions, because I don't believe 3rd edition had actions spelled out this way. So when you get to your turn, you can take a standard action, a move action, a minor action, and then you can take as many free actions as you want. So, and you can trade these actions around. So a standard, you're only going to get the one standard action, but you could use your move action or use your standard action to move again. So you get your move action, but then if you wanted to move again and basically move twice your speed, you could, instead of taking a standard action, take a second move action. And the same applies to minor actions. You can trade those in you can trade your standard action and your move action to do more minor actions. So this is I don't believe that they were called that in 3rd edition. I think they had a slightly different naming, but that's the idea. So once you get to your turn, standard action, move action, minor action, and then anytime you can take free actions, anything that's designated as a free action. The thing I thought was interesting when I was looking through, coming into this video, I took a glance through the booklet to kind of refamiliarize myself with it and anything that I wanted to kind of call out. One thing that I thought was interesting is it makes the thing that says simple rules, many exceptions. So down in the 3 basic rules, it says every class, race, feat, power, and monster in the game breaks the rules in some way. Which I thought was really interesting. So it's basically coming right out and telling you that there's this core set of rules that we're talking about, but right off the bat, everything in this game is essentially about different ways that you break those rules. Every action that you take, every power that you do is tweaks that you get to do as a character. And it's similar to in previous editions. Maybe it's a little less so in the earlier editions. If you're talking advanced D&D, you had a set of rules, but you didn't really have these things abilities that different classes could do per se. But spells always were types of things that you are bending the rules. And so 4th edition is no different. It there's always things they're talking about how you can bend the rules a little differently. So there you go. Hey, Avery, welcome. And I apologize. I should mention I had done a previous stream and I tried to set up the low latency where we could have like more real-time communication, and that it was awful for the quality of the stream. It really broke it up. I'm hoping to do some things to fix that, but for now, for this one, I did set it up to the normal latency, which means there is quite a delay. But as I see the chats pop in here, there's probably about 20 seconds between when you type your chat before you would hear my response to it. So just be aware of that. I'll try to moderate my speed here so that I can account for those sorts of things. But anyway, that's a little tangent here. But Avery, welcome. So what tips do you have for a first-time DM in 4th edition? I was familiar with the rules as a kid, but need to refresh and writing my own encounter. What are your tips? So that's really good. And that'll be something I'm going to cover. I'm going to have like entire videos talking specifically about that, because if there's something that's great about 4th edition, it's the DMing. The tools that it has for DMing are amazing. When we get to talking about like the Dungeon Master's guides, it has really good stuff in there about how to build the encounters, and we'll see in a little bit the structure of the encounters and how they're built in here. We'll review that when we get into the actual adventure book, and you will be able to see how, as a DM, it really helps when you're setting up a session, because it really puts it all together for you. Whereas with 3rd edition and in 5th edition and other editions of the game, you get kind of the outline, a little bit of what's there out of location. But in 4th edition, it really tells you everything that you would need to know. In most cases, you've got everything right there. So just with a published adventure, you've got the stuff right there, and you just kind of run it as written. You could take a minute and read through it, and you've got what you need to know. As far as building your own encounters, that's where the Dungeon Master's Guide is really going to come in. 4th edition has great math for how you decide how many monsters to put in and what kinds of monsters. The different monster roles really help you in determining what mix that should be, because you don't want to have too many like leader monsters out there. You want to make sure that you've got some minions and things like that. So the Dungeon Master Guide is going to be the place for that. That information is not really in Keep on the Shadowfell. This is designed to get you playing the game. So it's got these quick start rules for the player on how to play the game. And then when we get into the adventure book, you'll see that there's quick start rules in there with a little bit more that talk about, for the Dungeon Master, some extra things the Dungeon Master needs to know to run the game. It doesn't go so far as getting together how to build an encounter, but that is something we'll do in a future video. Probably won't get into too much detail on that one here, but so that's but that is something that's one of the best features of 4th edition, is as a Dungeon Master, building encounters and all of that stuff. So we will definitely talk about that at some point. So, hey, Trinell, welcome. Glad you're here. So nice. I'm super excited about these videos and getting started and kind of taking this from ground zero with 4th edition right from the beginning. Let's go through this and talk through it. So, looking back at the quick start rules, so the next thing it talks about opportunity actions. So again, these are kind of reactions that if something happens, there's a trigger that causes an opportunity action of some sort. The most common one that it particularly calls out is an opportunity attack. So if if you and another creature are in melee, your tokens are right next to each other, and that creature moves to a different square while it's adjacent to you, that allows you to take an opportunity attack. So before they do anything, you get to make a basic attack on them, because the idea being that they've let their guard down for a moment, and therefore in that moment you see it, you spot an opportunity attack, and you can make an attack. Similar if they're adjacent to you and they pull out their crossbow and try to make a ranged attack against you while they're actually adjacent to you, that also allows you to take an opportunity attack. Likely the scenario being that if they're pulling out a longbow and going through all the effort of trying to make an attack with a longbow when they're less than 5 feet away from you, you're going to have some kind of opportunity there to make an attack. So opportunity actions are big. And again, this is, I don't want to get into too much comparison of 5th edition to, or excuse me, fourth edition to fifth edition to third edition. It's not really about comparing. I'm more thinking about it from the standpoint of, if I was starting playing fourth edition in 2008 when this was released, my mindset would likely be at, okay, how different is this from third edition? So when I talk about third edition, I'm really thinking about it from that side, not saying one is better than the other. It's more about trying to acknowledge where there might be differences. Third edition has opportunity attacks, or attacks of opportunity. I think they changed it. But it's the similar premise, so as here in fourth edition. Immediate actions, interrupts and reactions are immediate actions. So specific powers. So when we get into powers, there are some powers that tell you it's an immediate action. So you essentially can you can take one per round, and you cannot take them on your turn. So an interrupt lets you act before the triggering action is resolved. So these would be things, again, kind of like the opportunity actions. It's something, there's a trigger of some sort that allows you to do a thing. But in this case, with the opportunity one, you're doing like basic attacks. You would just swinging your sword or shooting a crossbow. The immediate actions might be more tied to a power where you get to do something else if it has those keywords and the powers. And we'll get to looking at the powers in a little bit as well. So that's another type of action that you can take. Then now we start getting into the real meat of things. I think we definitely had a lot of overlap with third edition, as we're looking through that. If you're coming from third edition, you're looking through most of those rules so far, and you're saying, okay, well, that all sounds familiar. That seems very similar to what we have in third edition. Now we're going to get into some things that are more fourth edition as far as the structure of a turn. The turn is broken up into 3 parts. So when the initiative goes and the DM says, all right, now it's your turn to go, there's 3 parts to that. The first thing you have to do is, if your character is receiving ongoing damage, so you were attacked in the previous round and a monster did something that gave you some ongoing fire damage, you would take that damage right now at the beginning of your turn. If you have anything that does regeneration, if there's other effects that are taking place. So all those things that were like external stuff that happened, that's where you would do that at the very beginning of your turn. And that's important because, you might be able to heal. You know what? You might have a power that allows you to spend a healing surge or something. But you can't do that until you can actually use the power. And you can't do that right at the beginning of your turn. At the beginning of your turn, you're going to take that damage first. And then the next part of your turn is when you can spend those actions and do something. So that's important to keep in mind, because that ongoing damage you take might be the exact amount of damage that's going to knock you unconscious, in which case you can no longer use that power because now you're unconscious. So it's really important to understand the sequence of these things when you're executing them in the game. So the first part is things like ongoing damage. Then you're going to get through your actions: standard action, move action, minor action. Free actions you can do pretty much anytime, but the standard action, move action, minor action are the ones that you're going to do the most. I don't want to dig into too much, because otherwise I'll spend the entire stream here talking about one page in this book if I given the chance. But if there's definitely things anybody thinks that's important to add, I'd love to see, if I'm glossing over something that's really important for those that have played the game a lot, I'd love to have that pointed out so I can, highlight those things. Or if there's any questions about anything, I'll dig in a little deeper, but, so then you take your actions, and then the last part of your turn is the end of your turn. And now here's where you get to do saving throws. Now, this is where, if you come from third edition, certainly if you're coming from fifth edition, a saving throw is different in fourth edition. Saving throws are not like what you would have in some of these other versions of the game. But when you have some sort of, like, remember we said say you had some ongoing fire damage, in that power it would say save ends. And essentially what that means is then at the end of your turn, you would make a saving throw and to determine whether or not that fire damage is going to continue into your next turn. If you succeed at the saving throw, then the damage ends and you won't have to worry about it. But a saving throw is just you roll a d20, and if you roll lower than 10, then you fail. If you roll 10 or higher, then the effect ends. So it's not like a Constitution saving throw or a will save or anything like that. This is just a straight d20. If you roll less than 10, you fail. If you roll 10 or higher, you succeed. That's what a saving throw is in fourth edition. And then there's other effects that might automatically end. There's some effects that might last for a certain period of time. And so now would be when those end, if they're at the end of the duration. And that's basically your turn. So it's those 3 parts. the start of your turn, taking your actions, and the end of your turn, and it's broken down into those parts. This is similar to, you know, a lot of games have a structure like that, where there's a sequence of events to make sure everything happens when it's supposed to happen. Then we get back into some things that are probably familiar to folks. Attacks and damage. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but critical hits. A lot of people hear critical hits. The critical hit is you roll a natural 20 on the die, and that's a critical hit, and you deal the maximum amount of damage that you can deal with that attack. The interesting thing is that there's no confirming criticals in 4th edition. So in 3rd edition, you would roll a natural 20, and then you would have to roll again. And if the second roll would also be a hit, then you get a critical hit. And you get, I think it may be different in 3rd edition as far as what the damage was. I think in 3rd edition, it's double the die, whereas here it's just max damage. So some differences there from 3rd edition. And there's arguments for either way. I like the idea of you roll a 20, you just get a critical hit. I like it. Keep it simple. No need to do this other stuff. So I like that 4th edition did that. Flanking is something that was in 3rd edition. It went away in 5th edition, but I like flanking. That's a key part of the positioning on the map. Getting your characters in the right position where you and an ally are exactly opposite each other, surrounding an enemy, and you get bonuses then to your attacks, which makes sense, because if that enemy is surrounded by 2 people that they're trying to fight, their attention is going to be distracted, and it makes sense that those attackers would have an advantage in those situations. Other actions, basic attack. That's your melee and your ranged basic attacks. Charge, second wind, where you can spend a healing surge using power. So some of that we'll talk a little bit more on those, but that's the different actions you can take. That seems to change with every edition of the game. There's different actions that you get to take. So some of them are similar, but that's nothing unusual there. I think once you got to play the game and get a feel for what those different things are that you can do. Movement, walk, shift, run. I want to highlight just the shift part of this. This is also something someone coming from 3rd edition probably wouldn't think too much of this, because the idea, I think maybe if anyone's got more experience with 3rd edition, you can chime in and let me know. The idea in 3rd edition, I believe, was if you move out of range. So if I'm going to flip over to, let me go to a map here. If I can find my map. Let's see. Oops, I'm not on the map, but let me go to the map. So when we're talking about, I'll do 2 things. So just to kind of demonstrate. So let's say that this is a monster that you're fighting. This is you. This is one of your allies, and you can see you are flanking this enemy. You are you are in a position on either side of the enemy. Therefore, this enemy in the middle is going to be distracted. And then when each of you make an attack, you will get to have a bonus with that. So that's the idea with flanking. If you're here, you are not flanking. You're both engaged with them, but they can see you a little differently. They're not quite on the defensive as they might be when you're opposite them. So that's the idea with flanking. Now, when we're talking about a shift, so now let's take, this monster here is adjacent to you. They're in a square right next to you. And with a shift, they can, a shift movement allows them to move 1 square. And so that's what a shift movement is to move 1 square without giving up an opportunity attack. Because in 4th edition, any movement out of a square that is engaged in melee would give up an opportunity attack. So if this monster is here, they are adjacent to this hero. And as such, even if they were to move here, they just moved out of a square that was threatened by this creature, and therefore they will give up an opportunity attack to this hero because they did that move. Now, if they instead, when they make this move, they use a shift action, they will not. They're making that move in a way that they are being very defensive and making sure that they don't give up that opportunity attack. So in 4th edition, any such movement out of a square, it doesn't matter where it is, any such movement, any of these moves around this enemy would give up an opportunity attack. But with, I think, and again, someone correct me, in 3rd edition, I believe it was only a opportunity attack if they moved out of reach, threatened reach. So right now this monster here is within reach of this hero. And if that monster moved here, I believe that was still okay. But if the monster moved here, they now have moved out of reach of this. And that movement out of reach is what would have given up the opportunity attack. So if that's different, if I remember that different from 3rd edition, someone let me know. But the idea with 4th edition is that movement is much more precise. You have to be mindful of every move that you're making, including all of these smaller moves that you might make around another creature, because you might be giving up an opportunity attack if you're just doing a regular movement. So there you go. That's the shift action that you can take there, which is really important as you get further into the game. Hey, Steve, welcome. Then we get into forced movement. I'm not going to go too far into that one. I think that's pretty maybe similar. So some of your powers will allow you to pull a creature towards you. Other powers will allow you to push a creature away from you. Other ones will allow you to slide a creature in any direction that you want. And it'll indicate on there how many squares that you can move that creature. The key with some of that is that if you're pulling a creature and it moves into one of those movements where it might give up an opportunity attack, it wouldn't give up the opportunity attack. You can't force a creature into an opportunity attack. The opportunity attacks would only be if they are voluntarily making a move into a position that would give up an attack. Distance and movement. Occupied squares. So distance movement, sorry, you just count squares. That is a slight difference from other editions of the game in that diagonal movement in particular, everything is 1 square all the way around. You don't have to worry about this 5, 10, 5, 10, 5, 10 type movement. If you're moving diagonally, everything is just 1 square in every direction. Keeps it simple. And 4th edition, it's probably a good time to bring out 4th edition measures squares, not feet. Other editions of the game are measuring feet. 4th edition just went with squares. Not a big deal for me. I think it's fine. Since you're talking about a grid most of the time, squares seems to make sense. If instead, just out of habit, you refer to it as 5 feet, 5 feet, 5 feet, that's just as well too. But so I think that's fine. Occupied squares. You can move through ally squares, but you can't move through enemy squares, and you can't end your turn inside an enemy square, or an allied square, unless that ally is prone. So those I think are pretty straightforward, and I think are in prior editions as well. Difficult terrain, you have to use twice your movement for each square of difficult terrain. If it would normally just be 1 square, but it's difficult terrain, you'd have to use 2 squares of movement to go through it. Another different action points. Everyone starts the day with 1 action point, and then during the day you might get more action points depending on how many encounters you do during that day. And if you don't use them, they all go away and you start the next day with 1. And by day, I mean an extended rest. So every extended rest, afterwards you would start with 1 action point. And then you use those action points to essentially get another action. You can do another standard action on your turn by spending your action point. Hit points, you will have, that comes from your class. You'll get a maximum hit points. Bloodied is half your hit points, and then dying is when you hit 0. I think the bloodied term is definitely new in 4th edition, the half your hit points. I don't think any of the other things are going to be terribly of a surprise for folks that are coming from a previous edition. And again, if anybody's out there that is brand new to just RPGs in general and you have questions, drop them in the chat right now or in the comments later on if you're watching it later. And then it's got a little bit about healing surges. That's one of the big things in fourth edition is healing surges. So every character, it's different as far as the healing works. You don't have just, you roll a D8 or D4 and get heal and hit points back. Every character has their surge value. And so when you do healing, that's the amount of healing that you get. So every character will get a different amount of healing, and you have to spend those healing surges. So a potion of healing in fourth edition isn't just everybody, you roll a D4 and everybody gets, and whoever's receiving that healing gets whatever the result is. The healing potion essentially lets you spend a healing surge, and then whatever your surge value is the amount that you're going to get. So that's definitely something that's a little different. And again, there's other debates about that one. I won't dig too far into it here, but that one causes a lot of questions, and some people love it, some people hate it. So that's definitely a little tweak. Short rest and extended rest. Every version of the game has some variation of this, and they call them different things. But the idea is that here, a short rest is about 5 minutes and allows you to recover things like your encounter powers and use healing surges. An extended rest is essentially the end of the day. It's going to be like 6 hours long, and you're going to get all your daily powers back. So that's the notion of it in fourth edition. In other editions of the game, they have different names, and they all do the same basic thing in the different versions of the game. They just might have a different name. The skills, I won't talk too much about the character sheets because I'm not going to build a character here. We'll look, these character sheets that they have are not like standard character sheets, so I'm not going to dig too much in that. But the skills, since third edition, we've had skills, and how you get trained in those skills and what the values are for those skills is definitely different in fourth edition, where you choose which ones you want to be trained in, and you get a different kind of bonus, and then you add half your level along the way. Definitely different from third edition. If those of you are coming from third edition, where you had ranks that you put in every time you gained a level, you got a certain number of skill ranks, and then you would assign each of those. Each ranks would essentially be one additional point that you could assign to a skill, and you decide which skills you want to improve in. Fourth edition does not have ranks like that. It uses half your level. As you level up, you get to add half your level, and you might get other things as you change ability scores and things like that. So it's a different way of approaching skills, and some of these skills are different. There's way fewer skills in fourth edition than there are in third edition. And so from the quick start book, that's the quick start rules themselves. So basically 6 pages of really just the essentials of what you need to play the game. So if you're new to fourth edition, the quick start rules that you'd get and Keep on the Shadowfell are going to give you that over the course of 5 or 6 pages. You're going to get the gist of what you need to do to play the fourth edition game. So that's a great starting point for it. Now, hey, welcome. I won't try to Dr. 3DG3. Sorry. I don't know. I'm sure there's a way that I should pronounce that, but I'm struggling with it now. So, but welcome. The next thing we're going to look at is the characters. So now we have kind of the basics of the rules, and the rest of the quick start rule book is the characters. And what I kind of like about this, I feel like they probably did it this way on purpose, but the way they're set up is every character sheet that they give you for the pre-gens is 2 pages. And so like you have your dwarf fighter, and this is the front page, and then you flip it over and there's the back page, and then there's halfling rogue, and you flip it over and so it's front and back. So I think the idea was that you could, easily flip between it, front and back. I don't know, maybe that wasn't their idea. Because if you were to ruin your book and tear out that page, you would have one sheet of paper with both of those on it. So front and back, and that would be one sheet of paper that has that character on it. So that is convenient. Now, I don't know anybody that would tear out a page from their book, but I went in and I pulled them out and I made them into it's just the character sheet. So they're actually the opposite, but that way, for the purposes of our review here, we can see each character's front and back of their character sheet on one screen here and talk through some of the stuff. I'll go into a little detail on some of the first one maybe, and then we'll kind of gloss through the rest of them so that we can get over to the adventure. But the structure of the character sheets that they give you for the pre-gens are basically the same. You got a spot where you can, if you were to write on it, you could write your name and the gender of your character. That's and then you've got your hit points, the bloodied value, which is half your hit points rounded down. Bloodied, for those that may not know, bloodied is it is half your hit points, and there are some powers that take effect when somebody is bloodied. So, like for instance, there might be, and I don't know any off the top of my head, I could have looked one up, but where if some healing might have a little more oomph to it if the target that you're trying to heal is bloodied, or there's attacks that might deal more damage if the target is bloodied, or if there's some powers that a monster might have or abilities that a monster might have where if they get bloodied, they get to do something extra. Or things like that. So bloodied it's not a condition per se, like where you have an actual thing that just affects you. It's more a trigger that sometimes opens the door for other things to happen. So it is really a cool thing. And it's a good indicator if you're DMing a game and you have a monster that has X number of hit points, and that monster gets down to half that hit points, you can just kind of let the party know, hey, this monster is now bloodied. And that way they know roughly the condition of that monster. It's an easy way for you to convey the state of that monster without having to just try to be descriptive and say, it's bleeding out of its shoulder and it's walking with a limp and things. I mean, you can still do those things, but bloodied is a nice way for them to understand how much did we have to spend to try to get this creature to half their hit points, and how much farther do we have to go. So that it's a nice tool, I think, in 4th edition. Healing surges is, in this case for your Warfighter, is a 7. So that means that anytime they spend a healing surge, they're going to recover 7 hit points. End of story. There might be some powers that a cleric or warlord might have where when they heal, they say that the target, so say the dwarf fighter, they use this power on their dwarf fighter. The dwarf fighter can spend a healing surge and then gains additional hit points equal to the charisma modifier of the warlord. So something like that. So sometimes there are, depending on who's using allowing them to spend the healing surge and stuff, there might be some additional hit points that you can gain as part of that. But generally, when you spend a healing surge, you get, in this case, 7 hit points back. And every class will have a different number of hit points. And then you also have a certain number of healing surges per day. This is important because at the end of that day, if in this case, the dwarf fighter uses up 12 healing surges, they have no healing surges. And so even if someone has a power that says, that the other creature can spend a healing surge, if that creature doesn't have a healing surge, then they can't use it. They would not be able to heal from that. So there'd have to be some other power that you'd have to use or some other means to try to get the hit points back for them. So that's really important, that there is a finite limit to how much healing you can get in a day for in 4th edition. Initiative, I won't talk too much about that. Armor class, Fortitude, Reflex, Will. This is definitely one that's similar to 3rd edition. If you're coming from 3rd edition, you would have heard of Fortitude, Reflex, and Will. The difference being that these are not saves; these are actual defensive values. So some attacks would go against your armor class, some would go against your Fortitude, some against your Reflex, and some against your Will. So it would say in the power that this is an attack versus Will. And then when you roll your D20 and add your bonuses, that target that you're attacking would have to compare the result against their will value, not their armor class. So here, this dwarf fighter has a 17 armor class, but if someone attacks it in an attack that goes against their will, well, they only have a 12 will. And so it's a lot more likely that that attack would be successful if it's something that goes against their will. So that can really come in handy when you're attacking during the course of combat. And depending on what the creatures are that you're attacking, if you've got some sort of creature that's got a really thick armor and, you're having trouble getting through it, but someone's got powers that would test their reflex or their will, those are going to be the way that you want to go. And so as you learn about your creature during the encounter, you'd strategize a little differently. Basic attacks. 3rd edition also had basic attacks, so this would be familiar with those coming from 3rd edition. This is essentially, in this case, they have the dwarf fighter has a maul and they have a dagger. And the basic attack bonus for the Maul is a +6. Basic attack bonus for their dagger is a 3. That would be a ranged attack, which means they're actually throwing their dagger. And then here's the damage that they would take, or they would deal with those attacks. Racial traits, all this comes from when we get to the player's handbook, we'll see where a lot of this stuff comes from, because it's all, that tells you how to create characters. These, they've just taken it all and they put it in here. But the player's handbook, which at the time would not be released for another month after this book was released. But once you got the player's handbook, you'd be able to go back to this character sheet and you would be able to see where all this stuff came from, because the height, the weight, the speed, the languages, the alignment, all those things are in the player's handbook, how you determine those things. And then the skill bonuses they get, which it mentions specifically that they get Dungeoneering and Endurance. But then on the second page, you can see that there's all the skills and the values that they have for all the skills. Powers. All right, here we go. Powers. If we want to talk about what's different between 4th edition and the editions that would come before, someone coming from AD&D, someone coming from 3rd edition, this notion of powers is going to be different. It is not something that exists in the same way. You would have, cleave would be like a feat in 3rd edition. Here it's a power that your fighter is going to get, and they would get to choose this, as if they have several options and they would choose this. So some of these things, I won't say a lot, but some of these things exist in other games in different ways. Like cleave, like I said, is a feat. Some of these other things would be similar to other feats that you might get, or they might be similar to just abilities that you get as part of a race. They're just put together a little differently. Certainly, if you look at 5th edition and you see things like rage would be another one that's part of a barbarian. Sneak attack is part of a rogue. These are things that are they're abilities that you get as being that class. Here, they're kind of wrapped into these powers that you get with the different class. And so they took it and structured them in a way that's really easy to follow. It's written mechanically, so you can understand exactly what the criteria are that you need in order to use these powers and what effect do they have. So just taking a quick look at this, and again, the player's handbook, when we talk about the player's handbook, it has a really good breakdown of a power and how to read a power and what all the different things mean in a power. So, but if we imagine ourselves, this is brand new to 4th edition, this just came out, we don't have all that detail. They didn't really go into how to read this in great detail. So when you look at this, you kind of got to figure it out a little bit on your own, because you have, you've got this at will, you've got martial, weapons, standard action. We talked about standard actions, melee weapon. So, there might be some things on here that are a little bit, I'm not sure I saw that. And it's probably back there in some of the rules that we saw, but it's very structured in telling you what this thing is. You get a little bit of flavor text here to talk about what this might look like on the battlefield. And you say, you can see that it's going to target one creature, and here's what your attack bonus is. We were talking before about things that attack different things. This one is going to be versus armor class. So you get a +6 bonus against the enemy's armor class. And then if you hit, you're going to deal 2d6 damage +3, and an enemy adjacent to you takes 3 damage. So this particular power is one where the idea being, and I'll flip over to my map here. Oops, sorry. So if I'm the fighter right here and I use this cleave power, let's say I've got 2 enemies and I use this cleave power against this one, I make an attack roll and I succeed on that attack roll, I'm going to deal, according to the power, 2d6 +3 damage to this monster. And then another enemy adjacent to me is going to take 3 damage on top of that. So I made 1 attack against this monster, but because I succeeded, not only did I do damage to that monster, I dealt damage to an adjacent one. Whereas if I was just making a basic attack and I attacked this monster, I would only get that damage. I wouldn't deal any other damage on there. So that's the idea with cleave. That's the kind of thing that powers do for you. They give you a little something extra that you don't have otherwise with just a straight up thing. And this is honestly one of the things that I know that causes some consternation amongst people who are not fans of 4th edition, is that that fighters historically, they just wield their weapons. They do their weapony things, and they swing their axes and their swords, and they deal damage, and that's really what it is. We start getting into some of these powers, and Cleave is a pretty basic one. It is a feat in 3rd edition, so it's not anything too crazy. But you start getting into some of the powers, and then people start questioning, why is it that the fighter can do these things? Those are the types of things that would be reserved for spellcasters in other editions of the game. And maybe that's the case, but I would argue, and I think other 4th edition fans would argue, is like, why is it that spellcasters have to be so special? Why can't it be that if a spellcaster can spend their entire lives learning how to cast spells and do special things based on that training, why can't a martial character like a fighter, who's also spending their lives learning how to be the best fighter that they possibly can be, would also learn how to do some pretty amazing things with their sword? Not just swing it and hit an enemy, but actually do some crazy things with that. So it's a whole big debate out there, but Cleave, this is not new to 4th edition. This was something that was in 3rd edition. Reaping Strike, another one similar. This one, the nice thing about Reaping Strike is you'll notice that you get 2d6 plus 3 if you hit, but then you also deal 3 if you miss. So even if you miss with the Reaping Strike, you still deal a little bit of damage. So that's, again, another type of power. And ask yourself, as a martial character, if I am really super good at using my weapon, then it's possible that, yeah, even if I miss, I still hit a little bit. I nicked him a little. So because I'm just that good. So, that's the idea with a lot of the powers, is that these are people that have trained their lives to do these things, and they can do some pretty amazing things. So, the Book of Nine Swords. I had just learned about that one maybe a few months ago. I had come across that one from 3.5, and I saw there's a whole section in there about about basically having powers. And I thought it was funny that so it actually started with 3rd edition. And here's the thing that I find interesting with it. And I'll put on my 4th edition apologist hat for just a second. We'll kind of break the 4th wall with this whole idea that we're pretending that 4th edition is brand new. But the rules that came out for 4th edition, it's not like you had a couple people that just sat back and said, hey, let's just get crazy with this. Let's just take it. And we've got these crazy ideas, and we're going to do these things. When you think about it, the people that put together 4th edition, these are people that put together other editions of the game. This is Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford and others that have been with D&D for a long time. And yeah, they've got some pretty creative ways that they want to approach things, but a lot of the stuff that's out there is because people have provided them feedback, because they have played games where they've experimented with some things. And so when you look at like the Book of Nine Swords that was part of 3.5, and then you look at what 4th edition became, these are things that were out there that were because people wanted to try some different things. They had these ideas. It's like, what if we did this? What if we did this? And that's where this stuff comes from. It's not just someone just made it up. There's other people out there who played the game this way and had these ideas of homebrew things that they did, and they just kind of evolved into things that went into these supplemental books that came out as part of 3.5, and then eventually into 4th edition, and then things that are in 5th edition. So it's always it strikes me as interesting that it seems like there's this notion that 4th edition just somehow just made up this stuff off on a whim, and that was it. It's like, but all this comes from people doing their own homebrew stuff and coming up with ideas for their games of things that they think would be good. And it gets play tested and put out there, and some of it works, some of it doesn't. But I like the fact that they try, and this was the way that they went with 4th edition, because it seemed to be a good direction based on feedback they were getting. So those are at will power. So at will powers, you can use them as many times in a day as you want. They basically would be your basic attack. I know the basic attack is a different term, but because you can use them as much as you want, you would just use them generally as whatever your attack is going to be. An encounter power, you can only use once per encounter. So once you use it, you would have to take a short rest before you can use it again. And a short rest is just 5 minutes, and that's to recover your energy that you would need to run the encounter power. Now, the encounter powers are going to allow you to do a little bit something extra. And if you look at the at-will powers, it has +6 versus armor class in both cases. And then like for the Reaping Strike, it's going to be 2d6 plus 3 damage. Okay. The encounter power is still +6 versus armor class, and it's still 2d6 plus 3 damage, but you knock the target prone. So you knock them down onto the ground. And now that target, because they're prone, is going to be in a more defenseless position. And so there's other attacks are going to have an advantage on it. So the encounter power gives you a little bit more, but you can only use that one time per encounter, and then you have to take a short rest. And then a daily power, as you might expect, is once per day. You have to take an extended rest before you can use your daily powers again. And again, they are going to be even more substantial, and it's a bigger jump between, the gap between what an at-will power gets you and an encounter power is, maybe, this. And the gap between what an encounter power gets you and a daily power is going to be this. The daily powers are going to be pretty substantial. As you can see, in this case, the attack is a +6 versus armor class. It's exactly the same as the other ones. But if you look at that damage, 66 plus 3 damage. So the damage is 3 times what it was for the other powers, which is amazing. And then even when you miss, you don't use that power. So this is a reliable power. That's the keyword. Reliable tells you that, which is really big. So even if you miss when you use this daily power, you still get to use it again because it has that reliable keyword. So you don't actually expend the use of it if you miss. Not all daily powers have that. So that is something that is important. So, but that's your power. So at first level, you basically have 4 powers to choose from. Your at-wills you would use over and over again. And then you would decide when it's the right time to use an encounter or daily power. So, yeah, so I can understand, the need when you're looking at the marshals and you're saying, hey, they can do these things. I can understand that it's different, I absolutely get it. You're 4th edition comes out. It's 30 years of D&D at that point. D&D had been around for 30 years. And up until that point, for the most part, martial characters did martial stuff. They did relatively mundane things. You had a bow and arrow, you had a sword, and you swung them. Now, you get to 3rd edition. There's certainly things that rangers can do and stuff that would start to be a little more advanced. But definitely, I can understand it being a thing that it's it's different. You see it and you start saying, huh. And it's a question of what do you want? And if you like the game to just to kind of lock people into those roles, then okay, that's one thing. If not, I personally like it where I feel like no matter what character I get in 4th edition, I'm going to have fun with it. I'm going to be able to do some pretty amazing things, and it's going to be cool. And that's not because they're all spellcasters. It's just because I get to do cool things. And I like that. I don't feel like I don't feel that you have as much of a situation where someone has to play the cleric, because the cleric just is going to do these healy things. And then you gotta, who's the last one that showed up at the table, you're going to have to play the cleric. And I know some people like playing old school clerics. That's fine. I'm not critiquing that, but not always. And so to me, you're kind of forcing people sometimes to have to play things they don't want. Whereas when you have a rule set where everyone has really cool things they can do, you don't have you have less of that situation where someone's stuck playing a character they don't want, because you could play any character and it's going to be really cool because you always have something cool that you can do. And I think it fits perfectly within the fantasy world of D&D. I think it makes perfect sense for some of these things. So, but I understand it is different, and it was different for those coming from 3rd edition, and that could be a little jolt for them. So I've skipped over a little bit of the class features, but there's some additional things that you get to do. So like you can mark a target, which gives them a -2 penalty if they attack somebody other than you, which is nice. You get a +2 bonus on your opportunity attacks. So another nice bonus there. And then you get a +1 bonus to attack rolls when you use 2-handed weapons. So those are all just class features that you get, very similar to what you would see in 3rd edition, where you have class features that would do stuff like that. And so you still have those sorts of things. Ability scores, nothing changed in ability scores. You get the same, the scores ranges are the same. The math to determine a modifier is the same. You do have the case where you would add half your level to a modifier. That's not really even covered in here, I don't think, but it's used in when we get to the player's handbook and you see how a character is created, that comes into play where you would see it. And the usage of that would be depending on the circumstances. Hey, Joshua. Yep. Thank you for joining. Hope you get a chance to rewatch it, and hopefully it's helpful. If you have any questions on anything or thoughts that I glossed over, definitely add those in the comments when you get a chance. So at first level, you will get a feat. So there's a feat here, power attack. When you make a melee attack, you can take a -2 penalty on the attack roll. And if it hits, you get a +3 damage. So you sacrifice a little on the attack, but in order to try to deal a little bit more damage, definitely something that's cool. And those are feats. Those are not uncommon. Someone coming from 3rd edition would see very similar feats to that in 3rd edition. Then the different gear that you got, 5 daggers. And this adventure will take you into 3rd level. So it's got then at 2nd level, you got some hit point increases. You get another daily power. And then at 3rd level, you get more hit point increases and you get another encounter power. So it has that stuff on here. So as you level up this pre-generated character, it actually already made those choices for you. Because remember, at the time you have this book, if you're playing through it, you don't have a player's handbook. You don't have the things to help you actually make choices. So you're kind of stuck with what they've decided. But that's okay, because the intent of this is to get you playing the game and to get you the information you need in order to play the game. And so there you go. So that's our dwarf fighter. I am not going to go into all the detail on the other ones, but inside the book, you've got then a halfling rogue, same structure with what you get. The difference, like a rogue has the second chance power that actually comes from their class. So in addition to their at-will powers, they also get another power that they get to use, which is an encounter power, just as part of being a rogue. The wizards are still a little bit different in 4th edition. So I won't dwell on it too much, but another change in 4th edition from previous editions is that, you have spells. So magic missile, ray of frost, scorching burst, acid arrow, burning hands. These are all spells, and they were spells in other editions of the game. But the way that you cast spells in 4th edition is different. I have a whole video talking about Vancian magic and my thoughts on it. But for whatever reason, people decide that that's a hill they want to die on, that Vancian magic is amazing. And so we shouldn't change it, but whatever. 4th edition changed how you approach spells. Instead, spells became powers. And they ran the same way, which to me, the wonderful thing about that to me is that if I'm a new player and I've never played Dungeons and Dragons before, and in my mind, I feel like I want to play a wizard. If I'm using 3.5 or 5th edition or other editions of the game, there's some intimidation there, because there's rules that it takes. There's the complexity that goes with playing a wizard that makes it intimidating, and it makes there's just some additional stuff you have to understand. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it's overly complicated or anything like that. Or even that it's worse or anything. I'm not. I just feel that it's a little intimidating. With 4th edition, because of the way they structured it and the way that the spells are now transferred into the same rule set that you have for powers, for all the different characters, it doesn't matter whether I want to play a ranger or a fighter or a cleric or a wizard or a warlord. Everything is basically the same. More or less, the way I build that character and the way I play that character from a mechanical perspective is the same. And that's huge, because as a new player, I have now, it's opened up the possibilities where I don't have that level of intimidation for any of the different types of characters that I could want to make. Right off the bat, I might never have played this game before, and I say, you know what, a tiefling wizard sounds pretty cool. I'm going to do that. And you just do it because the rules are the same. You don't have this extra complexity that you have to keep in mind to be a wizard. Now, the people that are the fans of having spellcasters be special, they would argue the opposite, and they would say, well, if everybody's special, then nobody is. So, yeah, okay, fine. That's your thoughts. I have different thoughts. I like it to be where it welcomes everybody in, and you don't have that level of intimidation. And the thing is that keep in mind too that There are variants. Not every class is the same. The core structure of how you build a character is going to be the same. The at-will powers, the encounter powers, the daily powers. But there are some differences. We already saw that for the fighter, they had some class features that made them a little different and got them some other stuff that they could do. With a wizard, you do have a spell book still. And you get to choose additional powers that you can put into your spell book. So, and then at the beginning of every day, you have to choose which 2 at-will powers you are going to pull out. So if you look here, or I think it's your is your daily powers. I think it's your daily powers. Sorry, not your helpful pillars. So in your spell book, you're going to have, like in this case, they have acid arrow and they have sleep. Normally you would only get 1 daily power, but a wizard gets to choose 2 because they have a spell book, and both of these spells are in their spell book. And then at the beginning of every day, they choose which of those spells they're going to have prepared for the day. And that's their daily power for that day. So if they decide that acid arrow is the one they're going to prepare, then it doesn't matter if down the road and that during that day, there's a perfect opportunity to sleep. They didn't prepare it for that day. They only have acid arrow. Very similar to 3rd edition in, you have spell books and you have to prepare your spells, and those are the ones you get to use during the day. In some ways it's similar to older editions of the game. I have a whole video on this too, where, the whole spell slot system allows me to say, if I've got 2 first level spell slots and I prepare acid arrow, I could cast it twice because I have spell slots for it. In the older editions of the game, you don't even have that. If you want to cast acid arrow twice, you would have to prepare acid arrow twice. And I think in some versions you couldn't prepare. I think in the early versions you couldn't even prepare it more than once. You could only prepare a spell once. But so there's been changes into how spellcasting works over the years. Anyway, this is just a little variation on it. You for your daily powers, you have a spell book. You can add spells to that spell book, and then based on however many you get at your different level, determines how many you can prepare at the start of a given day. So there you go. So that's the idea with the wizards and why they're just a little different. They still have some variation. And I think, that's, no, then we have our cleric. So similar type stuff. Clerics have your channel divinity. So here's another whole set of features that clerics get because they're clerics. They get healing word, channel divinity, divine fortune, and channel divinity to turn undead, channel divinity armor of Bahamut. So they have also other variants, so there are other things you get for being a cleric. It's not just exactly the same. There are some things that you get in addition. And then the Dragonborn Paladin, they get also some things. They have because they're Dragonborn, they get their Dragon Breath. As a Paladin, they get the Divine Strength and Divine Challenge. They get Lay on Hands. So, for arguments that you would hear that 4th edition made every character the same, every character you can see right from the get-go in Keep on the Shadowfell with the pre-gen characters, these characters are all different. The mechanics are similar in how you run each character, which makes them much more approachable than they would have been necessarily in prior editions of the game. But they all have their own little features that they can do. They get little bonuses. Probably the one that has the fewest amount of bonuses is the fighter, which is not uncommon. It basically just has the weapon attacks, but in the form of powers to give you a little something extra. But when you look at all these, you get second chance. And when you look at here, you're getting your sleep and acid arrow with your spell book, and here you're getting your channel divinities, and here you're getting your dragon breath. And so they all get something a little different. And so when you look at this, if you got your Keep on the Shadowfell and you're opening it up and you're saying, what do I want to play? There's 5 different characters here, and they are 5 different characters. They all have, you can look at every one of these and find something different that gets you excited and says, I want to play that character or this character. It's not like you're looking at 5 characters and saying, oh, these basically just do the same stuff. They don't. They are clearly different. So there you go. So that's and we've spent a good hour on this, just going through the quick start rules for Keep on the Shadowfell. So that's a pretty impressive, a lot of stuff to cover in this. So sorry, I was trying to open up my other screen over here. So, but it shows you, if you think about this as the first product for 4th edition, the first introduction to this game as a player, and this is really the book that the player would be looking at, is I've got about 6 pages worth of the rules to give me the introduction of how do I play this game. And that's not overwhelming. You need just 6 pages to really get a feel for how to play the game. And then the rest of it is characters. And you get to go through these characters and say, which one do I want? Because they get to do all these different things. Which one would I want to play? And, and there you go. And then, so in this 16-page book, as a player, that's what you get. Now, let's shift gears. Let's take a look at the adventure book. So the second book that came in the set was the adventure book. So, Trinell, that's a good point. Yes. You don't get a lot of that in this release. Is the power source is that, and let me go back and have a look. So does it say the power source for the character? I don't actually see that on here. So, but that is a good point that, would come out certainly as part of the, when the player's handbook comes out, they would see this as you're making a character, you would be able to see the power source. And that gives you a really good idea of what that character can do. Cause you've got martial powers, you've got divine powers, arcane powers, psionic powers, primal powers. And so, and as much as someone might say that, again, I'm putting on my 4th edition advocate hat here, but as much as somebody might say that they're all the same, it's just all the powers. But if you go and look at the martial powers book and you look at the powers that a fighter has versus a cleric versus a paladin versus a warlord versus a wizard, there are key differences. A scion, the powers that a scion has, they are very different in what they can do and how they can do it. And the bonuses that you get, the way that you can move things, they really have, and just, the flavor text, but the stuff that all these different characters can do is very different. You would think that it would start turning into, hey, if I looked at all the different primal powers and I looked at all the different martial powers, I would basically see the same power with a different name over and over again, because how much stuff could you possibly do? But you don't really get that. The stuff that these powers can do, because there's so many different variations on it, that you don't get into this thing where it's like, well, all the powers are just given a +2 bonus or a -2 penalty or whatever. No, they are very different. The types of things that they do are different. And the martial powers, the powers that they have are doing things that are enhancing their attacks and their weapons and things like that. The warlord powers are doing things that give them better healing abilities and better ability to move other people around on the battlefield. All that sorts of, they are very different. And that becomes much more apparent when you see the player's handbook and you can see the full list of powers to choose from, as opposed to these pre-gens where you're just given a set of things. When you start seeing all the ones you have to choose from, you can see those differences. And I think it's really a good point. And, when we get to the player's handbook and start talking about that in a later video, we'll see a lot more of that. And it's really interesting. So, let's look at the adventure. And I even though this book is 80 pages long versus the 16 pages for the other book, I probably won't spend as much time, because we'll just take a look at some of the encounters, because I think it's important. And I can't remember who it was earlier that was talking about, wanting to understand encounters and how to run encounters and build encounters. This will give you a good taste for how to run the encounters. And so, the format of this, again, coming from 3rd edition, this is something that would be very familiar when you're looking at the structure of the encounter. It's going to give you just an introduction to the story. It's going to tell you what's been happening recently, and then it's going to run through kind of what the adventure is. The adventure summary is the part that says, if you were to play through this adventure, here is what would happen. Here's the flow of how this would go down, and summarizes the entire adventure essentially into a few paragraphs. So that's really the part where you would go if you're trying to figure out, is this an adventure I feel like I would run? And the adventure summary is probably going to do that. The other parts here are kind of giving you background and setting the stage for the start of the adventure. This is very similar to what you see in other adventures that are out there. If you look at some of the Pathfinder adventures and the 3rd edition adventures and even the 5th edition adventures, you see basically the same thing. This structure to set it all up is really identical. There's nothing new here in how these are put together. Then we get a section of hooks. Again, this is not uncommon. Even you go back to any edition of Dungeons and Dragons, the 3rd edition or Advanced D&D, 2nd edition, the basic edition, you're going to have these the hooks, what's some things that would tie the characters to this adventure, and so why are these characters in this adventure? And that's what you're going to get in this section, is the different hooks that you can use. You don't have to use them. You can use something completely different. And again, this is nothing different, unique to 4th edition. It's just ideas, and you want to put those ideas out there, get people thinking about what's possible. And these are just some ways that you could pull the characters into the story and connect them to the events that are going to happen. Then we go into, now this is where it's interesting. I think this is where it starts. Yeah. So when we get to this adventure begins, we went through the quick start rules. Those are for the player. This is kind of like the Dungeon Master's Guide now. Now we're talking about a Dungeon Master's Guide for the DM. You're going to see a lot of overlap in some of the stuff in here. So there's a lot of stuff that's been printed multiple times because you got it for the players in the quick start rulebook. And then you're going to have that same stuff printed here, but there's also additional information. So, as you go through this, it's talking about what do you need to play? And, you need to have the adventure. You need to have the quick start rules. You got to get some players. You need pens and pencils, things like that. Talks about the encounter levels and the difficulty with the different encounter levels, and how hard it's going to be for the party to complete that particular encounter. And then it goes through the structure of the encounter itself. So I'm gonna skip over that for now, because it talks about what that is, but I really want to talk about that by looking at an encounter so you can see how it's actually set up. So I'll skip over that section for now. Then this is really interesting, is it goes through a breakdown of a monster stat. So this is kind of like we would have seen for a power card, and what the breakdown is of all the keywords and all those sorts of things on a power. But here it's doing it for a monster stat block, and we'll look at a monster stat block a little bit later when we get into seeing one of the encounters. But I like that it goes through, and for every single part of the monster stat block, it talks about what that means. So here, medium, natural, humanoid, and then human in parentheses, XP 200. It talks about what all those things mean. Initiative +4, senses, HP, bloodied, blessing of Orcus. It talks about all those different things and what they mean, so that you have what you need as the dungeon master when you're looking at one of these encounters and you're trying to get ready to run it, and you say that monster stat block. You can come right here on page 6 of this guide, and it's going to go through what all those different things mean and how you read that monster stat block so that you can be ready to run that encounter when the time comes. So I really like that. On one page, they really break it down. And this is something that's in like the monster manual when that would come out. But here they give you a page to go through it. Now we get into the quick start rules for the DM. Very much similar stuff. You'll see core mechanics, skill checks. You see those same 3 basic rules where we talked about how there's exceptions. So, yeah, monster stat blocks are one of the best things. And I think probably the 2 best things in 4th edition. There's so many things that I'll choose from, but the encounter setup in general to me is just one of the best things in 4th edition. I can't wait to get to that part in here when we look at it, because I feel that the encounter setup is just amazing. The way that they set up the monsters. If you come from 3rd edition, and I don't have one set up here, but 3rd edition and 5th edition is very similar in how the adventures are set up, in that you get a location, and it would say something like, here's the kitchen, and there's some food cooking on the stove, and the floor is slippery, and there's a light shining in from it. Would set the stage. There might be some read aloud text. Sometimes you get some stuff about treasure. Sometimes you get some things about some tactics. Not very often do you get that. But then it'll just say there's 3 ogres sitting in the corner, and it might give you a little bit of information about those ogres. But you don't get any stat blocks with it. If you want to play that encounter, you've got to go find those. You got to pull up the manual, and you got to find the stat block for the ogres and have that at the ready. And if you've got an encounter that's like there's 3 ogres and 7 goblins and 6 kobolds, well, I've got to flip then in the monster manual through all those to get those stat blocks for those monsters. And I got to, try to keep that ready. And I find when I'm running a 3rd edition or a 5th edition, it's like I'm in advance, I'm going out and copying those stat blocks and putting them into like a Word document or something so that they're all in one place, because it's a real pain to have to flip around between all the different books. But 4th edition doesn't have that. with 4th edition, you've got your monster stat blocks, and they put it right there in the encounter. Every monster stat, every NPC stat block is going to be right there in the encounter. Hazards, traps, all those are going to be stat blocks inside the encounter, and we'll see it in a little bit. And it's wonderful because I don't have to flip around. Everything that I need is going to be right there in the encounter. And the way that this stuff is structured, it tells you everything that monster can do and how it works, and when you can use it, all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's this is going to be pretty good. This whole section, if you were here at the beginning of the video, you'll recognize this. This is the same stuff that we find in the player's quick start rulebook, about the different types of turn stuff and critical hits and flanking, all that same stuff. And then we get a little bit more now. Now we get into more specifics about the attack types. Because if you remember, from a player's perspective, you are going to make an attack. And so the DM is going to say, roll your D20, and then, you're going to have your power that's going to say what you would add to it and things like that. But the DM has to understand a little bit more about that. They have to understand what that means. And so, melee attack, ranged attack, and then we get into close attacks and area attacks. A little later, it talks about areas effects and blasts and bursts. So all of that stuff is spelled out here so that the DM can understand what those things mean about origin points and the range. That's where you're going to get that, is in this set of quick start rules, which is inside the adventure book itself. And then you can, talks a little bit more about ongoing damage. You got a nice table here. If you have when the 4th edition Dungeon Master screen comes out, this sort of information is on that Dungeon Master screen. 4th edition has one of the most amazing Dungeon Master screens of any edition. Again, here's the same other actions you could take, the movement, all that stuff is the same as what was in the other quick start rules. So far we've kind of got a reprint of the quick start rules from the player, but there's a little bit more detail in how you determine some of the positioning and some of the targets and things like that on here for the DM's purposes. Difficult terrain, action points. I think most of that was the same as in the player's quick start rules. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. So excuse me. Sorry about that. Healing, rest and recovery. Yeah, so all those things are the same. It talks about gaining levels, which isn't. It's because you got pre-generated characters. They're already, for this adventure, you're going to be at level 1, you're going to go level 2, level 3. There is XP to be given out, and this is basically just telling you at 1,000 XP, you get to level 2, and at 2250, you get to level 3. And that they should be close to 4th level by the time they finish this adventure. So you don't have the full table of all the stuff. In the player's handbook, it would tell you exactly what you would do on when you level up and what changes you get and what other choices you get to make. That doesn't matter here because it's just pre-generated characters. So once they get 1,000 XP, you basically tell them you can now do the stuff that's in the second on your character sheet. If you look here, second level this is now what you can do, and then when you get to 3rd level, now this is what you can do. So that's basically the extent of what you're going to get when you're running this adventure. If you're using the pre-gens, if you're running this adventure later, after the player's handbook comes out and people are running their own custom characters, then that's going to be a little different. Conditions. 3rd edition has conditions. Some of these are different in name. Some of them are different in some of what they do, but the idea is the same as what you would see in 3rd edition. It's just something that's going to affect a monster or a character depending on what has happened during the game. So that's should be something familiar to those that are coming from another edition of the game, but something that we could drill into in a separate video if we want to learn more about those. Skills. Okay, if you remember in the player's quick start rules, they just had essentially one column of one page was talking about what the different skills were. Here we get a lot more than that. As the DM, you need to understand what are the different skills, when would you use different skills, and how would you assess the difficulty of certain things. And that's what we get. Every single skill is spelled out here. Acrobatics, Arcana, Athletics, Bluff. So it goes through every single skill and then even gives you, what's the different levels of difficulty. So as you determine whether something is going to be easy, medium, or hard. And then like for insight, it tells, if you want to sense the motives of someone, if you want to sense some outside influence or recognize an effect as an illusion, here's what that would be. And then for perception, if you want to listen, this is, you're at a door and you're listening, what's happening on the other side. If somebody's whispering in, well, your perception check is going to need to be a lot higher than if they're yelling on the other side of the door. So the DM would use that to help them determine that. Knowledge checks are interesting. If during an encounter, the party wants to try to understand their enemy a little bit better, there might be a knowledge check that they would have to do to determine that. So if you are, so you might do a nature check to try to learn what is this creature that we're fighting. So it's interesting. A knowledge check, it says that you either know it or you don't. So you can't get like assistance on a knowledge check. You either know the thing about it or you don't. But it also says that, let's see, you can use the skill to remember useful bit of information and identify certain kinds of monsters as noted in the skill descriptions. Somewhere in here, it says knowledge skill, no action required. Either you know the answer or you don't. So I think that's interesting. So during an encounter, you don't have to use an action to do a knowledge check. You can just say, hey, I would like to do a nature check or whatever the DM determines is necessary to try to learn about it. And you can see from the table, you can, depending on the level of your success, if you're successful, if you get a 15, you'll know the type of monster, the name of this type of monster, some of the keywords. But if you get like a 25, when you add your bonuses and everything, you might know exactly the resistances and the vulnerabilities, which can be a strategic advantage then for your party. If you've learned that this creature is vulnerable to fire, then it's like, oh, okay, well, we know what we want to use to attack it now. So anyway, this is good stuff for the DM to know. The players don't necessarily need to know this, but the DM does, and so it really expands on it well here. So so, and then, with these different types of, again, kind of going back to the different types of characters and the classes and whether you're a martial or arcane or primal, if you're a druid, then the types of monsters that you would know about when you do a knowledge check would be different from the type of monsters that some other character would know, than a wizard would know. And where your character is from. And so the DM would use that information to interpret how difficult would it be for one character or another to determine this level of information. So if you've got, if the one character in the party is a character that grew up on the city streets of Winterhaven and they've never left town, and they're down in some dungeon now trying to figure out the powers that some exotic creature might have, the DM's probably going to say, hey, that's going to be a lot more difficult for you than it would be for the ranger who spent their life in these dungeons and is very familiar with these things. So all that stuff comes into play. And that's where, the DM, this whole block on this page talking about these knowledge skills really comes down to the DM understanding the characters and the types of information they would want to know. And a lot of this, again, is not necessarily different from third edition. The specifics of it, the types of the values that you're trying to hit and things might be a little bit different, but the idea of a lot of these things is very similar. Someone coming from third edition and picking up this book is not going to be like, whoa, what is this crazy stuff? This is stuff that's been there for at least third edition. So when this comes out in 2008, they've got 8 years of experience, because certainly by third, with third edition in 2000, this stuff was pretty similar. These are not overhauls of a lot of this stuff. Okay. Encounters. All right, let's look at an encounter. This is where it gets really good. And again, we're not going to go through the whole adventure. I'll probably, because this one is nice because it sets up the adventure. As with any good adventure, you just want to hook people in right away. And just imagine you're with your group and someone has picked up Keep on the Shadowfell, and it's like, hey, the new 4th edition is out. We want to give it a try. It's like, okay, cool. And you go and you sit down and you're at the table, and they say, here's the pre-gens, pick out which character you want, which of these you want to do. Okay, cool. And, there's not a lot of setup there. All of a sudden everybody's sitting down. You spend a few minutes reading through your character and kind of figuring out the rules and say, okay, all right, let's get to it. And how do we go? We got a hook right away. The very first thing you do is a nice combat encounter to pull everybody into the adventure. And if we go through this, we can see why 4th edition really shines in this area. So you've got the setup, and it tells you exactly how many of all of the monsters. I think you can barely see my cursor there. So you could see what are different monsters. There's 5 Kobold minions, 1 Kobold Slinger, and 2 Kobold Dragon Shields. I'm not sure if somewhere in here, I think it probably did maybe in the Monster Stat Block talk about what a minion is, but you can certainly tell it from looking at this. You know, you've got your 5 Kobold minions, and you can see that they have 1 hit point. And so right away, you know from looking at that stat block that this is not a very strong monster, but you've got 5 of them. So if you look at the map, you can see for the party coming down the road from over here, when these monsters start coming out, that's going to look pretty scary, because they've got, 8 different monsters coming at them. They don't know that 4 of these are only have 1 hit point. That 5 of these only have 1 hit point. They just see 8 monsters. And so right off the bat, this party is like, oh boy, what are we going to do here? And they got to start getting creative with their approaches. And if you look at this map, and this is one of the maps in the book, so this is part of the poster map. So you don't even have to draw this yourself. You can actually use this map. And so you get a nice, cool map to work with. But you can see there's bushes, there's some rocks. And so there's places to kind of do a little ends around and try to, so there's a lot of opportunities for movement. This is what makes good maps, is when you can do these places. People can duck down and hide. When they first show up, they may only see a couple of these monsters. They don't even see the rest of them. So there's a lot of cool stuff here just by looking at this. But, in these 2-page layouts, you get all this stuff for you. So you know what the monsters are, and it's like, I don't have to flip to the monster manual or the back of the book or something to see the stats. There they are right here. This is it. There's no encounters that I have to go to another book to look at. Whenever there's an encounter, the stat blocks are right there for me to work with. And I can, as the DM, spend a little time up front while the players are reading through their pre-generated character sheets and getting familiar with the rules and things. I'm sitting here looking at this encounter and looking through the different things that the monsters can do. And they're, and then I can be ready to run this encounter. And I've got everything right there. I don't have to be scrambling and looking in all the different places. So I think the fact that they put it all for you there is amazing. So yeah, minions. That's a good point with minions, is that minions can be underestimated, because the thing about minions that's funny is that a minion only has 1 hit point. And so you think, whatever, I don't need to worry about them. But minions do just as much damage as any other monster. So if you don't deal with those minions right away, then you're going to find yourself in trouble pretty quickly. So even if you know that they're minions, that doesn't mean that the encounter feels less of a threat, because those minions, they have the same amount of damage that they can deal. They have powers that they can inflict pretty substantial damage on you. So, and they can move just like other creatures. They can, like this one has the shifty, so it can shift 1 square after minor actions. It's got javelins, it's got spears. So it's, they can do some pretty cool stuff. And if you just think, oh, it's just a minion, I'm not gonna worry about it. Well, think again, because it's only 1 hit point for you to deal with them. But if they go first, and all those minions have higher initiative and they get to go first, they can do a lot of damage before you ever get a chance to get a shot off. So that's, it's a pretty interesting strategic thing you got to think about. So here you get some block text to kind of set the stage. If you want to read through those, most of the block text in any adventure is just kind of, it can be a little lame. But it's fine. Certainly as you're just getting started, it's good to just read through it, and it'll set the stage perfectly fine. Then you get a little bit of information that's kind of for the DM to know, but you don't necessarily want to tell the players. That the players might figure it out as they're doing their things and strategizing. They might ask questions, and there's some information here that might help as you might provide to them if they ask the right questions and things, or as they move around to kind of get set up. There's things here that might help the DM kind of plan that out. There's a little more block text or box text as the players move around. So, you get a lot of stuff to help you set this up. Now, there are some encounters that are not necessarily as detailed as this one, and we'll look at some of the other ones a little later just to try to compare. But this one right off the bat, imagine set of new players, never played 4th edition before because this is the first thing that's ever been released. DM, never played 4th edition before because it's the first thing that's been released. This encounter right here, this is it. This is the one that's going to introduce people to 4th edition. And they set it up perfectly because the players have their pre-gen characters and their quick start rules. The DM has their quick start rules, and they have an encounter here that everything is right there in front of you to do. Everything you need. You could almost do this with no prep whatsoever. Just as you set it up, you put the things on the map and you say, all right, let's see what happens. You read the box text and then players start doing stuff. You start, and you could be completely reactive to it, but everything you need is right here. You don't find yourself having to flip through anywhere else to get the information you need. This section right here is always my favorite because you get a little of this in some 3rd edition modules, some Pathfinder modules, some 5th edition modules. There will be a tactics section, but not very often. But you see it a lot in 4th edition. Obviously, with 4th edition being very really leaning into trying to make combat as interesting as possible. Tactics are important. You want to know, what do all these creatures do? And so you've got kobold slingers, you've got kobold minions, you've got dragon shields. And this will tell you exactly what they're going to do. How do these creatures react? When the initiative starts, what are they trying to do? Who are they going to attack? Where are they going to move? Do they wait until something happens? Is there a trigger that they're looking for? Do they fight to the death, or do they give up and run away? Whatever it is, the tactics are where it helps you as the DM figure out what you want each of these to do. Because obviously a dragon shield should behave differently on the battlefield than a minion would. And the tactics are what helps you to play them properly and do what they should do. I try to take things a little bit further, and I try to think of individual creatures. I might have minions where some of those minions are willing to give themselves up really fast. Other ones are going to run away, where other ones are going to think that they're the dark knight that's going to win the battle all by themselves, and they go charging right in. Whatever it is, but that's, by having the tactics, you've got a foundation then where the DM doesn't have to figure out all that stuff on their own. This is what these monsters are going to do in these different situations, and then you can build on that. But a lot of encounters in other editions don't have that, but 4th edition does, which is wonderful. Features of the area, a lot of other ones will have this. A lot of times what you get you'll get a features of the area for like the dungeon. So like thinking of like Lost Mine of Phandelver, you'll get, if you go into the Goblin Cave at the very beginning of it, it'll give you a features of the area overview for the whole dungeon and kind of what it feels like in there. What's it smell like? It's damp, it's musty, it's dark, all those things. You'll get that at the beginning. But you don't necessarily get that level of detail for each of the different locations. And maybe you don't necessarily in 4th edition either. I'd have to look at some of the other encounters farther on in this adventure. But this one, for this one, I mean, look at this. For this one location, I'll skip over treasure because that's there. But, look at all these features that you get. It's describing everything, the road and the grass, the boulders, the foliage, the outcroppings. It's telling you how you can use them. And again, let's think of this. This is the first thing for 4th edition. Imagine a DM who has never played 4th edition, or maybe has never played D&D at all. It is spelling it all out for you. And it's telling you all these different things, how you can describe the situations, how you can move around these locations, all this stuff. And that's really super helpful for a new DM, but also for any DM, anyone that's running, any DM. The more time that you can save having to prep for an encounter, the better. And these published adventures are much more valuable when they provide this information with this level of detail. And so that's great. Treasure, you'll get treasure in other adventures as well. So that's something that's, you get that here. Not every encounter results in treasure, but of course, with the first encounter, if they defeat these kobolds, and then they get some treasure, and that's always good to start, your first adventure with, and you're like, hey, cool, we got some silver. Awesome. And then they move on down the road. So everything that you need as the DM was on this page. The rulings, obviously there's the quick start rules, and as people are moving around, you got to figure out about area attacks and close person, things like that. Those are rules, but from the encounter itself and the setup for it and the running of it, it's just all right there. And that this layout is it's great because this is the first thing that was released for 4th edition. And so the very first encounter you would run would be this one, and you can see how great it is. But what's even more great about it is that this was not, it's not like they put this encounter together and said, we're going to make the first one really good and get you hooked in, and then the rest of them are going to suck. No, all of the encounters in 4th edition in these published modules are set up this same way. Some of them, I'm not saying that everyone is perfect, but they all have the same structure with all the stat blocks and the tactics and these things. And we'll see that a little bit later. So then we get into more role playing. We went from combat and now we're going to actually do role playing, because what's going to happen here is so it gives you this DM's advice and talks about how to be the DM for the next section of this. So we just did combat. We had the quick start rules for the DM, which then went into this first combat encounter, which, okay, great. I just looked through all these rules about how to run combat, and now I did this combat encounter. Well, now it's giving me some advice about how to do a non-combat encounter. So this is more freeform, because we're going into this city and they're going to be able to explore the city, and you can see the map is going to have all these different locations on it, and they're going to decide where they want to go. And so it's kind of giving you some tips on how to do that as the DM. So it's kind of a little extension of those quick start rules for the DM. And then they call it Interlude 1, but it's essentially coming into Winterhaven. Now you've had this encounter with these kobolds, and now you're going to arrive at Winterhaven. And, this is where it gets a little difficult for new players, and certainly for DMs, where it's just freeform. It's just blank canvas of, it's easy when you're doing a combat encounter, say, hey, let's roll initiative and let's do this. We're going to take our turns and do this thing. But now it's just who wants to do what? Where do you want to go? Here's the map of this town. Where do you want to go? Who do you want to talk to? What do you want to say? That's where it gets a little more of a challenge. And so, but here's the information for the DM, tells you, there's a little box text to get you started. Talks about some of the people that live there, and then it goes through the different locations. So, number 1 is the Outer Gate. Number 2 is Rafton's Inn. And then, every spot on the map has a thing. It tells you who is there and kind of what their role is in some of this. Some of these things are not terribly interesting. They're just places, but the players might have ideas of what they want to do there. And then this is where Dungeons and Dragons gets interesting, because everybody gets to use their creativity in these situations of what do you want to do? It's completely open, and you make decisions. I had a game several years ago with a new player who decided he wanted to burn down a barn. And so he went and burned down the barn. And then I had the local fire marshal come after him and chase the party down and hold them to task for burning down this person's barn. So, anything is in play. That anything that the players want to do, they can have their characters do, and you as the DM then have to decide what the consequences are of that, or how difficult it's going to be, and you're just kind of running things and seeing how things play out. This is where it can be really fun, because it's not just the DM is not the storyteller per se. It's not a story that the players are participating in. The DM is more kind of helping the players tell their own story. And that's where the sections of the adventure like this really come into that, because the players decide where do they want to go in this town, and what do those conversations look like when they go talk to these different people. What are they going to ask, and how are the people going to respond, and what's going to happen. The DM has some clues. It's got questions, answers. So it talks about, when you're talking to like this character here, what would their responses be to different things? Presumably the players would ask some of the stuff, but maybe the players don't even know. So sometimes this DM might have to kind of volunteer some information to do that. And again, I've said it many times during this video that, this is not unique to 4th edition. This is how any adventure is. Anyone, whether you're new to your first D&D was in 2nd edition or 3rd edition or 5th edition, it's going to be the same. You're going to be in these situations where you're going to have players and a DM that's new and having to figure it out. And you're not really sure what you can and can't do. When I first played 4th edition, we had no clue what we were supposed to do. And the skill challenges were particularly a struggle because we didn't know what they really meant. We were kind of expecting more structure to some of that stuff, so it wasn't really clear what we were going to do. These can be a challenge for new people, and I would say I don't know that this is basically about the same as what you would see in any other edition of the game. You get a location and it gives you information about each of the buildings in that location. It gives you information about what the people in those locations might say if they're asked certain questions. What information would they give that would help move the adventure along? That's what you're trying to get out of this. And so it's a very free form. These last 4 or 6 pages, very free form thing, very similar to what anyone would have seen in prior edition of the game. 4th edition does it about the same in that regard. And then at the end of the section, it talks about where you go next. And so as they've had these conversations with the people in town, they would have sent them in and said, hey, what we recommend is you go set up an ambush on the road to stop these kobolds that are causing problems. Or we know there's a kobold lair down the road. Maybe you should go try that, find that lair, and maybe you can just root them out and just deal with this once and for all. Oh, by the way, there's this ancient burial site that's got some relic that we're trying to find, so that you get this information. And then the players decide which of those things they want to do. And they've got different options. Now it's completely freeform. That first encounter with the kobolds on the road, that was the hook. That was getting them started. And then they're going to go into town. As they're in town talking to these people, if you look and see these next steps, they can either end up at the kobold ambush, or they can end up at the burial site, or they can go to the kobold lair, or they can just start the dungeon crawl down in the keep itself. So they have 4 different paths they can take on this adventure, and it's completely up to the players to decide which way they want to go with it. And that's the best kinds of adventures, because you've got options now. You're not being railroaded into one specific way. You get to decide what you want to do. And this is where we'll start kind of breezing through the rest of this, because there's a lot of similarities. Then you can see the encounters one by one. If they decide to go set up a kobold ambush, you'll see that it's the same poster map that they had before, but we kind of look the other way on that. We use the same maps all the time in D&D. So, sometimes it's intentional. It's like, oh, we're back here again, and it's supposed to be back here. Most of the time when you're using the same map, you're just using the same map, and it's not really supposed to be the same place. So this is a case where they're not necessarily in that same location, even though it looks like it is. They're just somewhere further down the road, but it has the same stuff set up, tells you the monsters, gives you the features of the area, tells you, what they're going to do to set up this ambush, what the tactics are for the people that are being ambushed. You got your stat blocks, and then it's got a little sidebar about, about handling an ambush in general. And here we got a surprise round. That was something that came up in those quick start rules. If you remember, when you rolled initiative, it was whether there was going to be a surprise round. It gives you a little sidebar here to kind of help you remind you about the fact that if they did well with their setting up their ambush, they should have they should get a surprise round. I think I have it backwards. They're not setting up the ambush. Sorry, I was confusing with another adventure. This one, they're getting ambushed. They're heading out somewhere and they're getting ambushed by the kobolds. So if they get surprised by the kobolds, then the kobolds would get a surprise round. So sorry about that. I was confusing my adventures here. This one, are trying to ambush them. So anyway, but regardless, there is the notion of a surprise round in this, and so you get to get some experience in some different types of encounters where there's different circumstances, not just the same thing over and over and over again. Wait, this one's got a little different element into it. Then there was the kobold lair. This one has a few different layers to it. And again, we still get to use those poster maps, which is nice. So this one is broken up into 2. We've got the outside the kobold lair. So basically, as you're approaching the kobold lair, here's the encounter that you would have there. Again, all your monster stat blocks, the features of the area, the tactics, a little sidebar about the lair, and how there are creatures inside that may or may not come out to join the fight, and then some of the creatures who are outside might go in and they'd still be in the. So if a monster here runs away and goes into the lair, now you have to adjust that encounter to include that monster because now they're inside. So you get a little sidebar kind of talking about that. And then you go inside, again, another part of the poster map here. And now you're inside and you get the, you can see the layout. You can see all the minions are in here. So you imagine you're the adventuring party kind of coming around this corner, and you see, oh, look, there's a couple creatures here, no problem, but they don't see all the rest of this. And, so as they're exploring this little dungeon here and slowly finding more and more creatures, that gets pretty interesting. And this is a pretty intense encounter. I've run this one, and this one will definitely challenge the party as they're just getting started. This is one where they'll be thinking about using those encounter or their daily powers to really try to do this, because some of these creatures are pretty intense. But you see, same layout for it. The burial site where they might find the relic, similar type of thing. This one, there's actually a treasure in the form of a magic item, which is nice. There's also a person here that they can talk to after the encounter's over. I think they're trying to save that person, if I'm not mistaken. And then we go back to, okay, so now we go back to more of the role-playing stuff. So again, we get a little bit of DM advice. So you can see how this adventure is really helping the DM and walking them through this whole process of what do you need to do. It talked about how you set up how you would handle the exploration of Winterhaven. Now you've gone off and done a little bit more combat, and you're coming back. You've completed those quests, and now you're basically back in Winterhaven, but you've got more information. As you've run those encounters, you've got additional things with more questions that you want to ask. And so it gives you a little more information to help the DM to run those things and to be, just take it to the next level now. Because you're back in Winterhaven, you can see you've got questions that you might ask, and you're going to get more information. And where do we go from here? And there may be things you didn't do. Maybe you just went to the Kobold lair and you didn't do the other things, and so those are still encounters out there that you might run into. That the DM would have to keep track of those things. And then we get into, now this is kind of like part 2. Where we're actually going into the keep on the Shadowfell. The idea in this adventure is that the keep is this ancient keep that's got a portal that was sealed long ago, but that seal is breaking down, and there's a group of some cult basically that is trying to open the portal and do bad things, and they've taken up residence inside this keep. And through all of this and the other things that you're doing, you're essentially leading you into this keep so that you can do this dungeon crawl. So. This now gives you, as the dungeon master, the background on the keep and where it came from, why it's there, and what's going on, and some of the stuff that you want to have in mind as you run this dungeon crawl. And the party goes and explores the dungeon. Now, they don't have to explore the dungeon all in one go. They would probably more do some exploration. Maybe they come back to the surface and they do some stuff, get more supplies, do some rest, and maybe do other things, and then go back to the dungeon. Or they might explore it and just take rests as they can within the dungeon itself. The dungeon has a couple levels, and so you get this nice map. This is none of these now. I think there might be a couple that are actually poster maps in the module, but most of this is just maps that you would draw, which is fine because you can see there's a lot less detail in these. So it's easy to just get out your wet erase mat and just sketch out these maps and put your tokens on there, and it's fine. And this is, maybe more similar to what you would see in some third edition adventures. You got general details for the entire dungeon as a whole, and what it looks like. Now, individual encounters might have different stuff, but you got, this guideline to help you. And it gives a little bit of an overview of the different sections. So you can see there's areas 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6. So it tells you what's in those areas, just at an overview here. And then when you drill down into the following pages, you'll have specific encounters where it gives you all the regular details. So then we go here, the Goblin Guard Room, which is area 1. If I come back up here and I find area 1 is right here in the middle. So this is essentially where you're entering the dungeon. And then when you go down those stairs, essentially, you are now in area 1. And here's your monsters that you're going to have. Here's the tactics. Here's the setup features. So now some additional features beyond what you had. And then there's some treasure that you get. So all the same stuff. You got a nice, again, right there for you. And then if we just kind of scroll through, you'll see very similar. Area 2, same setup. And just imagine yourself as a dungeon master, either brand new to tabletop role playing or just brand new to 4th edition. and you're looking at this setup, and it's really straightforward. These encounters are set up in a way that make it really easier for you to run. I'm not sure what this little sidebar is. Zombies in this encounter have the ability to grab their opponents and thereby prevent them from moving. If a grab attempt succeeds, the victim is immobilized. So then we get into those conditions. So if you're immobilized, that's one of those conditions that was covered in the quick start rules. And then they have to sustain the grab. So the zombie creature would then have to do a check, use a minor action to try to sustain the grab. And then they can end the grab with a free action. So just a little bit of information about these zombies and how they have this grab that they can do. But it just gives you a little bit more info to help you run those zombies. So that's nice. And you get your tactics here. This one says, interesting. So it gives you some special stuff about initiative. So don't roll initiative until one of the runes in this has been triggered. And then about what the characters see. So vision. So now we get into the dark. So this dungeon is now dark, and so they need to have a light source. So it's giving you that information as well, that they need to have a light source, or they need to have dark vision or something to be able to see anything down the road. So more info. Now we get some experience with line of sight. These are things that were in those rules, but now we get to actually see them in practice. When we run this encounter, we get a little bit of what can people see. I can't cast this or run this power if I can't see the creature there. So that's helpful to get a little sidebar. And then this is quite the gauntlet here. The skeletons and Bahamut, the platinum dragon. So, and just kind of moving. I'm trying to see if there's a, so here's more of a role-playing encounter. This one talking to Keegan, Sir Keegan. And so he must be a medium natural animate undead. So so you actually get a role-playing encounter in the middle of this dungeon crawl, which is nice. So it's not just fighting from room to room. You're actually getting some interaction with an NPC, which is cool. And then there's this cool one. This is a pretty cool dungeon with these you got difficult terrain that you're working with. And you have the options to move around differently. This ochre jelly is quite large. So, and you've so far you've dealt with rats, you've dealt with goblins, you've had an NPC. So good variety. Kruthix now that you're working with. And the water cave. This one, I feel like there's some, this is maybe more difficult terrain. I'm trying to see the water. The water is calm, but so you can swim across it. So you get, the treasure, you get potions of healing, shield of protection. Then you can collect, there's a sheet that contains a map of the keep. Well, that'll come in handy, certainly. So you can see, this is a really nice, dungeon crawl as you're going through this. Is like, it's got a lot of variety in the types of things that you do. It's not like you just go to the next room, fight a bunch of creatures, go to the next room, fight a bunch of creatures. There's different stuff in each of them, which is nice, and I still keep putting on I've just gotten 4th edition, and this is the first thing I've seen. I know I'm biased because I'm coming at it from after the fact, but this is probably why I fell in love with 4th edition, because this is the type of thing I would want. I'd want to have this type of adventure. This is what I think of when I think of D&D. Interlude 3. So this probably came up earlier in the adventure. There might have been a mention to this of what this was. So I don't really know exactly what this one was. I don't want to linger on it for too long. So, because I want to get to level 2. So basically you've completed level 1. There's this interlude of something that happens when you're back at Winterhaven. And then you go back to the keep on the Shadowfell, and then you do level 2. And now you've got like wandering monsters even. So you can decide what monsters exist in different parts of the dungeon where there may not be monsters specified, or if they linger too long in a certain area. And it's, a lot of the similar type of what we saw before, these encounters. You can see the number of encounters. There's lots to do in this. Now, along the way, keep in mind that they're leveling up. So you're going to get XP, and at some point your characters are going to level up, and they're going to be able to start using those second level and even third level powers that they've got access to. And then I think, this one here, we've got some hazards now. So now they're not just monsters, but these are actually hazards, so that they have to deal with in this one. So it's nice. And you see they're dealt with very similar to monsters in that they have a stat block, and there's things that they do that are very similar to monsters and how they interact with them and the damage they do. So which is nice, because you have that consistency in how you run these things. You don't have to learn something new. It's just another variation on the same idea. And I think once we get back to our poster maps. So now we're getting to the boss monsters. And so we get to use our big poster maps for this one. And, you can see there's a lot of places to run around and hide from things. You got a lot of pretty advanced monsters at this point that have a lot of cool powers that they can do, to keep things interesting. There's a pit that is 50 foot deep and spills blood into the room. So that's pretty cool. And then another poster map. And this is Kalarel, who is the main boss monster for this adventure. So this is really where everything's going to come together at this moment, where you're going to try to seal up this portal that is at risk of collapsing and bringing bad things into the world. And then I think that's basically the end. And then you get a little note here that I think it points you to the player's handbook to level your characters up to level 4. So the player's handbook, by the time you finish this adventure, the player's handbook should have been out, because this is a long adventure, and this came out only a month before the player's handbook. So by the time you finish this adventure, the player's handbook would have been out, and you would have been able to level up to 4th edition. I don't think it mentions the name of the next adventure, but this is part 1. And then the second one is, does it say it on the back of the book? I don't think it does. And now I'm drawing a blank as to what the name of the next one is. I know the third part of this is Pyramid of Shadows, but I can't think of, the name of the next adventure is completely escaping me right now. But there's, it continues. If you want to continue with the next adventure, there's a whole nother module that looks very much like this one. And, in the fact that it's a booklet with multiple adventure books and some poster maps and things like that. So, and you can just pick up where you left off with those same characters if you wanted, or you create new characters, whatever you want to do. So there you go. That is the introduction of 4th edition. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. I would flip over to my other screen, but apparently my mic is not set up on that screen for some reason. So I got to stay here on this screen so that folks can hear me. But that, just if we go back in the time machine and, you're a D&D fan, or you're wanting to be a D&D fan and you want to try it out, and this is the first thing that's been released, and this is your first take on it. And I think, as a starter set, which is basically what this is. It didn't come with tokens. It didn't come with character sheets. It didn't come with Thunderspire Labyrinth. Thank you. It didn't come with dice, so it's not like a box set or anything, but it has everything that you need to learn 4th edition. And if you're right now trying to learn 4th edition, you're curious about it, it is free. I can't stress it enough. Go to DriveThruRPG and pick it up. It is absolutely free to download the PDFs with all the maps and everything. And then you can go to Noble Knight Games if you want to get a physical copy of it. It basically costs the same amount as it did back in 2008 to get one that's near mint. If you want to use the affiliate links in the description, if you're going to do that, please do, because that would help me out. It doesn't cost you anything, but might help me out. So anyway, sorry, a little plug there. But I mean, you got your pre-gen characters. You got quick start rules for the player. You got quick start rules for the DM. You got a really substantial adventure that's going to get you through 3 levels of play. It's a really nice dungeon crawl. It's got some, I don't know that I'm sure there were some skill challenges in there, but probably not, because they didn't really cover skill challenges in the quick start rules. So maybe they didn't actually have any skill challenges in this one. That might come later. But you definitely had interactions with NPCs. You had some role playing when you're walking around Winter Haven. So a lot of stuff. I think it's a really good introduction to 4th edition, and the way that they do encounters in 4th edition are just perfect for people that are trying to learn the game. And, whether you're a new player or DM, I think it's got all the great stuff in it. So it's, for me, it's, this is a great start to the game. And if I think about somebody who's coming from 3rd edition and asking them, it's like, hey, this is the new game, it's different. There's, powers are going to be the big thing that are a different way to run the game and a different way to organize those things. But it's not like it's, so much of the rest of the game is the same. The core mechanic is the same. Skills are similar. The way you adjudicate actions and things, it's all very similar. The way the adventures are set up are very similar in the structure of all the different parts of it. The encounters are different. The format that they set up the encounters are different. And that some of that might be a little jarring if you really liked the way that they did it in 3rd edition, but I feel that this was a clear upgrade. But, if I'm sitting here, I really feel like I would look at this and say, wow, this is really cool. There's a lot of awesome stuff in this. And, I'd love to play more of it. So, but hopefully, for those that are watching this, hopefully this was a good, trip down memory lane for those of you that have been playing 4th edition for a while. Because I think it really, I really like going through some of these old things and looking through what they did. And if you're watching this and you don't have any experience with 4th edition, or you're just trying to learn it, hopefully this helped you see kind of a really broad overview of what it is. Took us 2 hours to go through it. And I think, hopefully it showed what 4th edition is all about at its core. And I know we had a question early on talking about building encounters. That's something that'll come a little later, because the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, those were all released on the same day back in 2008. I won't do one video to go through all of those, but when we get to the one where we talk about the Dungeon Master's Guide and we go through the building of encounters, that'll be a key part of that one, is to talk about some of that math that you use for it. So, but here, this one was all pre-structured, pre-generated characters. The encounters are all already built for you. And it's a pretty good narrative for the story to get people introduced to it. So, anyway, I think we will wrap it up there. I think we covered all the ground that we wanted to. I had a lot of fun with that. I like getting nostalgic and looking back at things. And I think it's good to take a look back and remind where things started, and to really get that picture of, if you're coming from 3rd edition and you're going to move to 4th edition, here's maybe what people might've been thinking when they first saw it. And, so anyway, but I had a lot of fun. And I hope you did too. If you have any other thoughts of, what else you'd want to look at. I mean, my plan probably will be I might just jump into creating some characters, and going through that process of how to create a character, maybe building an encounter, as opposed to actually looking at the books. Or if we'd rather actually go through the books and look at them in detail, we can do that too. I'm open to ideas. The idea is to just think about, imagine 4th edition was new, and it's just getting released, and we're trying to relive all of that and everything. So, but anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments for this and what you would like to see in the future. I would appreciate it. If you are not already subscribed, please do subscribe to the channel. I also have a newsletter. You can subscribe to that as well. But for now, I think we will end it there. I appreciate it. I had a great time. Hope everybody did too. Until next time, take care.